Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. When I got the email from your people, I had literally just come from yoga and there was a pamphlet there called, it was the Phoenix, and it was like, I was like, that is so amazing. It was like one of those serendipity moments. So I was like, I have got to talk to this guy. So tell me a little bit about who you are and your role at the organization you work with.
Yeah, so
For.
um, Scott Strode. I'm the executive director and one of the founders of the Phoenix, which is a free, sober, active community that uses the inherent transformative power of connection and meaningful activities to help people who are healing or impacted by substance use. And started it, a little over 16 years ago with some friends, and have been running it ever since.
16 years. That's amazing.
Yeah,
I
yeah, it
mean,
is.
those
It's
of
been
us that are those of us who wrestle with addiction issues, we tend to jump from thing to thing. So, congratulations on being consistent.
yeah, well, the beauty
Amazing.
of scaling a nonprofit is it never is the same. So it's constantly evolving, and it keeps my interest. So I think
Very
if I
good.
was stamping widgets out for 16 years, I'd probably be doing something else by now. But it's different every year, and the sort of cultural moments around substance use change, and the need
Mhm.
is shifting and evolving.
Yeah, I'm sure you see this too. I'm finding that the sort of alcohol-free space is changing dramatically these days. I feel like it's changing like on an exponential level. So it's just it'll be interesting for me to find out from you how you see it changing and pivoting and how you guys adapt to that. But first, I like to start out usually with the lightning round, which since you listen
Oh,
to the
nice.
podcast is very slow.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
No, I'll try to go a little more lightning-y than some. So
okay. No,
you can
it's
go
all
deep
me.
sometimes. So
Yeah, it's all
yeah.
me. As so many questions. Okay, well, we'll just start off with the basics. So, was there a book that helped you early on in your recovery journey?
It's interesting because I think the book that helped me early on probably had really nothing to do with addiction or recovery.
Oh, really?
But two powerful books early on for me. One was Into Thin Air, which was about misadventure on Mount Everest. But
Okay.
but what it did was it started to help me dream of what was possible in my life beyond my identity in my addiction. And
Hmm.
hearing about climbers and these high places that are like changing lives of folks that stand on top of these mountains, and the sort of goal and the aspirations of climbers, it started to sort of awaken something in me. And another book that was kind of in that track was about misadventure. It's called Deep Survival: Who Lives and Dies and Why. And I read it more for the outdoor experience side of it, that talks about expeditions and why they fail, or how people die in the outdoors, and the sort of psychological sort of factors behind that. But what I was really learning about is like survival responses that get ingrained into your brain at the primal level. And what I realized in that book is what my addiction was doing for me over the course of my life. I started to understand that it was actually a survival mechanism that had been sort of woven into my how my brain works at a pretty young age. And it was a protective mechanism really early on to kind of numb some pain I was carrying from adverse childhood experience. And but that book talking about climbing, it kind of helped me better understand how the brain works and why addiction sort of takes over sometimes. And you say, oh, I don't know why I drank. I was trying not to. I just sort of ended up at the liquor store. And I think if in that book I had a better understanding of some of that.
There's something about understanding the science through the science lens that sort of depersonalizes it in the way that we're like, oh, it's not just me. This is a biological event that's happening. It's biological and psychological, so that if when we understand the mechanics, it's a little impersonal. It's like it takes a little of the shame out of it. I love that side of it.
Yeah, it really did. And that was key for me because I carried a lot of shame, as most folks do. Um, that was driving me to my drinking and using.
Yeah, there it is. There is always, they say that the drugs and alcohol are but a symptom and of a deeper issue. So yeah, that's very helpful to know. Do you have a regular self-care practice, like a morning routine, or maybe you might see it as a weekly view?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've in other episodes I've heard folks talk about sort of having young kids and the challenges that
Oh yeah,
creates around
geez, yeah,
self-care. Self-care is like a relative term at that point.
it for
Um,
sure is.
but spending time with my family really is self-care. I mean, not every minute of it. Some of it's really hard, but with
Some
the
of that
little
is
ones.
service.
Yeah, but my wife and I are really supportive of each other. She gets her morning workout routines a couple times a week, and I get mine the opposite days. And we sort of carve out that time for each other. And I come to work to do that, at the Phoenix. So my community is also at work for me, and they're there to support me, and I get to have that outlet of moving my body a couple times a week, which helps with my mental health, and being in the community keeps me grounded to the why behind the work.
That's really important. Do you have a spiritual practice included in that?
Yeah, I don't really you know spirituality really, I sort of found it more in my recovery journey through sort of awe moments, when
Mm,
I got led to climbing and being in these like beautiful places in the outdoors. When you stand on the edge of a mountain and the sun is coming up and it's cold and the snow's under your feet, crunching, and you just find this moment of awe. And I think in those places is where I found my spirituality. So nature still is that for me, like even if it's as small as going up to Vermont with my family and seeing the leaves and being outdoors. Um, that's my spiritual place.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I remember for a while I was asking people, what do you do for fun? Almost without exception, people would always say, I go out in nature. There's something about, I mean, that feeling of awe really is a spiritual experience. And nature is just so, there's something about the vastness of it that kind of makes you feel small, but not insignificant, more like connected.
Yeah, and it's really special with I mean, my son's like 2.5, and
Oh, he's
through
little.
through his eyes, he finds it everywhere,
Yeah,
but the busyness of life, we sort of pass by it sometimes.
for
And
sure.
and every now and then he'll say, "Wow." And I'll say, "What is it?" He's like, "Look at this leaf." And it's like, there's a whole pile of leaves, and I look at it as something we have to rake up, but he looks at it as like the beauty of this one leaf. And so it helps me sort of stay in that mindset.
That's a beautiful thing. I need some grandkids or something. I mean, not yet, but no, no, that is really interesting when you are with it. It's so funny. Like a lot of life depends on who you're with because they bring their own perspectives. And if we know our friends well, we go out and have experiences. It's that idea that joy shared is greatened, heightened, expanded. But having like a new little soul on the planet, it's so fun.
It
That's
is.
awesome. Yeah. Um, what's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
I I would say I wish I better understood um where the deeper wounds lie within me,
Mm,
um or lay within me, because I think there was like this expectation that now I'm sober, now I'm trying to approach relationships differently, and I should be better at this now. But the
oh,
truth is there was still a lot of pain there that I hadn't yet unpacked. And I think I would have given myself a little more grace.
yeah.
Because I think that sort of lack of grace for myself was part of my substance use and part of the pain I still carried with me in early recovery. So if I could have just sort of realized that we're sort of all in recovery from the human condition on some level, and know that we all have, tough parts and great parts, and parts that succeed and parts that fail, and parts that still struggle, and that is all of us, contained within us, each one of us, that I would have been more understanding in my early journey.
Yeah, that's actually very profound. It is, man, if we could just give ourselves a little bit of grace, there are those deeper wounds, which really compel us to drink. Yeah, I feel like getting sober is just the very beginning, right?
I,
Just putting down the drink, like that's just the very, very beginning.
a great
Um,
beginning, but
it's a great, yeah, it's
yeah,
necessary. It's
yeah,
absolutely necessary.
but yeah, it's
Um,
still a journey.
yeah, really. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, you talked about adverse childhood experiences, and I feel like that's a great way for people to connect. I mean, we all kind of need to identify a little bit about, why are we the way we are, like it's so interesting how what happens in childhood sort of sets the stage for everything else. So you don't have to tell me the worst trauma you ever had,
Yeah,
but just if you want to kind of just give an overview.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the well, another book I'd probably add to the list, but later, was one by Nadine Burke Harris called The Deepest Well.
Ooh,
And Nadine, I think, is the Surgeon General of California. Um,
okay.
but she ran a clinic in one of the, more sort of under-resourced neighborhoods of San Francisco. And she started to realize that through the ACE score, which is the Adverse Childhood Experience score, um, her patients scored off the chart, and they had come from poverty and, obviously trauma and a lot of environmental trauma, but also, difficulties from primary caregivers and other things. And and what that can lead to is significantly sort of shortening your life expectancy. But for me, the reason that book was powerful is I started to realize that I don't think it wasn't that I was sort of inherently broken from difficult experiences as a child. It was just I was having a normal reaction to to adverse experiences. And to frame that up a little more, I had a stepfather with alcoholism, and there was alcoholism more broadly sort of sprinkled throughout the family. And and then my father had untreated mental illness, and undiagnosed, untreated. And so as a young, from like 3 years old on, we would split our time between my mom and my dad. And so in one home we had a very different childhood experience, and in the other it was the opposite. And growing up with my father, I think he was doing his best, and he had his own adverse childhood experiences. But he really couldn't care for us. He could barely care for himself. So I think, at a young age, having to sort of essentially raise each other, my brother and sister and I, when we were with my father, and then coming home to alcoholism after those weekends, we sort of it was a pretty dynamic childhood. And it what that did for me is it really inflicted a lot of self-esteem wounds. I started to think that I was the problem that was causing so much drama, amongst the sort of caregivers in my life, and that my siblings and I were. And it made me always trying to figure out how to not be the problem. But after a while, that became my identity, and I just sort of settled into it as that I'm sort of a failure, or sort of not deserving of love, or whatever else it was. And when you pour booze and drugs on top of that, it feels great. So you keep doing it, and you just start pouring more and more on top. But as you know, it stops working for you almost as
Mhm.
fast as it became a coping mechanism. So
When you were growing up and seeing you know, the alcoholism and in the adults in your life, did you have I hear a lot. I didn't have any that my parents didn't drink. I found it all on my own, unfortunately. But I hear from a lot of kids that have parents that were alcoholics that they like swear to themselves, I'm never going to be like them. Did you have some of those thoughts yourself?
for me, it was a little different because what I realized was, I was just looking for somewhere to feel connected and to belong. And
Mhm.
when I realized I could, steal booze from the liquor closet because a cabinet would have been too small, right? At our house, we had a liquor closet.
At your
When I,
mom and stepdad's house?
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I could steal a handle of vodka from that and get together with my friends on the weekend, all of a sudden they started wanting me there, and they started wanting me to be a part of and wanting to be with me, and more kids wanted to come hang out with me,
Yeah.
and it made me feel loved in a way.
Yeah.
And so, and also the people I respected and looked up to were sort of, all my cousins and step siblings and my stepfather, and so they were always around the keg or always pouring a martini. So it just felt like what you do if you're part of this family. And so as soon as I was sort of old enough, by old enough, I mean like 15, it was
Mhm.
fine for me to drink at family things. And I was
Oh,
just kind of
wow.
off and running.
How old when you do you remember your first drink, or was it just always a part of your life that you can remember?
Yeah, I do. It was I had a beer when I was either 10 or 11. And my cousins gave it to me, and I think they thought it would be like a deterrent, right? Like,
Okay.
oh, this is gross. I don't want this. We were out water skiing, and it was really gross, and it was hot, and it was like an old Milwaukee, and I was like, oh, I can't drink this. And they're like, oh, if you want one, you got to drink the whole thing. And they were sort of trying to, I think, like scare me straight, right, into not drinking.
Mhm.
But when I came back to school at that young age, like no one had had a beer. So all of a sudden everyone's like, you had a beer? That's crazy. What was it like? Tell me about it, And all of a sudden I was starting to get attention for that. And I was like, I actually know where there's a six pack, right? Like I can grab it on the weekend. I think I could take one and they wouldn't notice. And that was true. And that was sort of how it began.
You became the guy to like hang out with, and you were the good time guy type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of joke that I was hanging out with the wrong crowd until I became the wrong crowd, So then people were just hanging out with me.
Oh, the bad influence.
Yep.
We hang out with a bad influence until we are the bad influence.
That's
Funny how
right.
quickly we switch roles
It
that
is.
way.
It is.
Yeah. So did you just love it right from the beginning? I mean, did you like the way it made you feel or being under the influence, or was it more of how it helped you belong with everybody else, like community?
I think it was more the way it helped me belong. Um, and and of course I did like the way it made me feel, but even from the beginning, I think it was already sort of at that age, you're so young, it's like something you're already hiding and it's already sort of deviant, right? So there's no
Yeah.
like social drinking at that age. It's like
No.
you're just drinking to get hammered, and everybody that I partied with at that age was that way. And then I realized as I got into drugs, that I was starting to hang out with older and older kids, and until I was like hanging out with 20-year-olds and I was 17 or whatever. But when you have coke, then other people want to hang out with you. It's just sort of how it was.
How were you getting access at that young age to cocaine or whatever? Were
It
you
it was
selling them?
no, I wasn't, but it was pretty much the like, you go to your weed dealer and they have something else and you're like, what's that? And they let you try it. And you're like, this is awesome. This is so much better than weed. And then you realize it's really not. And but then you have access, so everybody would sort of pool money together and we'd go buy some, and I knew where to go buy it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how quickly you develop. It's so funny how we like develop these little networks, of people seeking the whole or companionship thing. It's kind of crazy.
Well, I think it's we're all, sort of have these wounds, and we
Yeah,
kind of find each other, and they sort of fit um, in a way that we build we find community. It's just not one that's designed to lift us up.
good point. Yeah. So tell me, when did you start having some consequences? It sounds like it was pretty fun in the beginning. When did you start having like negative consequences?
Well, I had like I mean, I would say pretty much right away. I had some negative consequences, but I had this moment that was sort of like injected into my later adolescence that was pivotal for me, which is where my mom, I think, was sensing that I was getting in trouble, and she knew she had to do something. And I think on some level I knew I had to do something as well. And she found this school program for kids with dyslexia, and I have a learning disability, which I think was also part of my substance use because I just never really felt like I could express my intelligence in a way that people would get it. Like the system wasn't really set up to see me or hear me. It was the way school worked, public school at that time. It was just I was so frustrated because I got moved from a higher sort of class level into vocational training. Like they said, oh, based on your test scores, you're gonna make aluminum siding for the rest of your life or whatever, and you're gonna go learn how to do that basically. And
Was that
I
like
was
in
like,
high school?
yeah, it was like in junior high. I got moved into a more of a vocational training program.
Hmm.
And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to cut school and smoke weed and drink beers at the train tracks behind the school. And that was way more fun than being in school. And so, you know, my mom was kind of trying to get me out of break that cycle of like the group I was hanging out with and the trouble I was getting into. And she found this program on a boat for kids with dyslexia. And I went on this boat program, and what I found there was those all moments that I was talking about earlier. I found the power of the outdoors and experiential sort of education. It was real, and it was raw, and it felt like authentic, and it just felt like, the wave would crush you on the deck of the ship, but it would crush everybody on the deck of the ship. It wasn't sort of like singling me out. And actually, in those moments, I started to find some of my own intrinsic strength that I didn't believe existed before. But I started to fall in love with that feeling, right? Of like
Hmm.
connecting to that part of me. And I wanted to do more of that. And I ended up starting working on boats, and those were, even though I was still drinking, I had stopped using drugs because I started to feel this pride and confidence in myself. And I just remember one time going home from boats and to the old crew in my hometown, and they were like, "Hey man, we got some Coke." And I'm like, "No, I'm good. Yeah, I'll pass." And but yet I was still drinking, right? But
Right.
it still was a milestone. It was kind of a harm reduction approach. I didn't know that at the time, but and then my drinking kept progressing even though I wasn't using. And then eventually, when I was 24, living in Boston, and working in a boatyard, um, my drinking had got so bad that when I would drink, I would relapse on drugs too. So I would get drunk and
Um,
then I'd buy and start using. So
did you ever have any legal ramifications?
I didn't. I mean, I was really fortunate that I didn't. I mean, I have friends that did, and I could have been me, I guess, but I didn't. And fortunately, somebody told me about this boxing gym in Boston, and I went in there one time, and I started to find that same feeling I found on the boat, which is
Mm-mm.
that self-esteem, that self-confidence, that belief in myself that I had lost somewhere along the way again. And it reminded me of boats, and I just started jumping into athletics sort of with both feet.
That really sounds like it really mirrors the work that you do at the Phoenix with a lot of because when I first heard of the Phoenix, it was through I think it was like through sporting activities. Like I think there was like a ski. I'm in Idaho, so there's like a ski event or something like that. And then there's camping and a bunch of other athletics. I later learned that there's hobby stuff too. My friend learned to make felt slippers when she moved.
Yeah.
She moved from Minnesota to Idaho. And she got involved in Phoenix and is learning all kinds of things. I'm a soap maker, like a hobby soap maker. I was like, oh my God, I gotta get out there and share my hobby skills.
Yeah, and that's a perfect
Yeah.
example of something you can share. And you're right. That was sort of how it started. I started doing triathlon, I started climbing, I started
Wow.
boxing, and and then I found other folks who did that too. My climbing partner when I moved from Boston to Colorado was in recovery, and another climbing partner was a clinical social worker. And that little group, we started talking about what if we could bring more folks with us. And that was the beginning of the Phoenix. And the idea is that
Wow.
if you're 48 hours clean and sober, you
Mhm.
can show up at any of those meaningful activities. There is a ethos at events that kind of says we're here to lift each other up, not pull each
Yeah.
other down.
Yeah.
And if you adhere to that and you have 48 hours, you're welcome. And if you don't have 48 hours, then maybe you will by tomorrow. And we'd love to have you come. And we try to scoop people up with love and share something meaningful with them. And even if it's making felt slippers, it's still
Yeah.
it's still like fellowship and connection with
Yeah.
others, and just having that shared activity makes
Yeah.
it more like we're shoulder to shoulder accomplishing something, and that actually opens up vulnerability so we can
Hmm.
start to build friendships and connections that ultimately are the thread that helps us stay tied to folks when if a relapse happens or life happens, we can turn to our Phoenix family and they're there for us.
No, that's beautiful. I feel like we kind of skipped a little bit. I'm skipping you around a little bit. But I want to kind of go back to like was there a moment where you're just like, I'm done with this forever? Was it a moment? Was it a process? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried for about a year and a half pretty intentionally to stop. And by that I just meant through my own willpower, I
Yeah.
tried to. Um, but for me, it was just one more of those really dark nights that you have. And I was
Yeah.
I went out drinking and then I went on a Coke bender and I was paranoid and like locked up in the dark in my apartment. And I was convinced the cops were coming for me and just sort of knew that if I continued this path, that's how my life would end. Sort of high on a bathroom floor somewhere. And the idea of somebody having to tell my mom that who I had gotten pretty close to over the years broke my heart. And that night was the last night I used. And the next day I was already starting to climb. I was already in the boxing gym. I was already sort of doing that harm reduction approach where I would work out a couple of days a week and go climb on the weekends and stay sober so I could do those things. But then Tuesday and Wednesday, I would drink and use, and then I would try to piece it together again by the weekend. And I just thought, if I just drop these last few nights, then and just go to the gym those days instead, maybe I could stay sober. And that's what I did. And then I just started waiting outside the gym with my gym bag, waiting for it to open. And I would go right from there to my house. And just that was my safe space for about a year until I started to have more friends around me that wanted to go on these adventures with me. And that made it much easier to sustain it.
Was there a reason that you didn't maybe try some of the old traditional ways of getting sober in the very beginning,
Yeah, I don't think I really knew at that point what treatment was or that treatment even existed. I think I had
like
like,
rehab or anything
yeah,
like that?
I don't
Yeah.
think I knew that. I mean, I've heard of Betty Ford probably at that point, but
Right.
I didn't
What year?
really.
What year are we talking about now?
This was over 26, just over 26 years ago.
Hmm.
So, and I would say the 12-step community that I plugged into first, I did try going to a meeting because I heard
Yeah.
about AA and it was, it just didn't feel like I fit in there. And I don't know
Mhm.
why. I just felt like um it felt like the folks that in that particular meeting had a much lower bottom than where I was at. And I sort of was like, oh, I don't know if this is my crew, right? I'd find
Right.
out years later I was much more like those folks in that room than I realized. But at 24 in Boston, where you feel like you're the only person not drinking at 24 in Boston,
Yeah.
it was pretty hard. But when I went in the boxing gym, I found folks who were training for fights and they were trying to make their fight weight and they were like really disciplined about what they ate and just like weren't really drinking because they were athletes, and some were in recovery. Two of the guys at my gym were, and but that became my fellowship.
Mhm. When you say they were in recovery, they were just alcohol free, or were they attending
Yeah,
a
two
program?
two of them were alcohol free. I don't know if they actually went to meetings or not, but they identified as being in recovery.
Oh, they
They said,
did. Yeah. They
yeah,
didn't
they said,
invite you to any meetings or anything?
no, we were just hitting the heavy bags and each
Yeah.
other. So
Hitting each other.
yeah,
Such a
but
guy thing.
yeah, but honestly, I think I needed that at the time. Like I think I
Yeah.
needed somewhere to release that sort of angst and
Yeah.
energy that I had.
Yeah, for sure. So let's fast forward a little bit because I know that you do end up, I think you said 6 years into living alcohol free, that you did end up going back, well, to traditional meetings. We don't have to say which ones.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I at that point, a lot of my friends, like the idea of the Phoenix was starting to kind of blossom, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
a lot of my friends were in recovery and we would climb together and they would talk about 12-step meetings and work in the steps and one of my really good friends was, pretty deep into the 12-step community and I was still struggling with some of the impacts of my like early childhood stuff. And he
Hmm.
said, try working the steps, see if it helps you. It might, it can't hurt. And and that was actually kind of hard because I feel like most of what I was making amends for or kind of looking at in my own inventory had happened in recovery. I couldn't even really blame it, on the drinking and drugging because it was most of that, you know, obviously went and did some amends around that too, but I also was looking at my behaviors in recovery. And for the first time stepping into the steps, it felt like a level of honesty I wasn't quite ready for, you know. But I ended up working the steps, and he became my sponsor, and it was cathartic for me at that point.
Hmm.
Um, but then through the Phoenix, my whole peer group and career track just had me totally immersed in recovery. So I found that support other places than in the 12-step community moving forward. So even though there was a window of time where I did work the steps and went to meetings fairly regularly, um, I now, I don't really go to meetings anymore, but I think at the time it was really powerful for me. And
I th-
and might have been the step that led me to doing some of my deeper trauma therapy that ultimately helped me with my root cause.
yeah, I think that's really the ticket there, is that there is something about that self-examination process. For me, the fourth step was probably the most enlightening experience I had had up to that point, because I never really had any kind of very like pragmatic self-examination experience or process, I should say. And so I was very confused, and going through the 12 steps and doing the inventory really helped me sort a lot of stuff out that I think prepared me for trauma therapy later
Yeah.
on. Did you have a similar experience that
I
way?
I I did, yeah. And I think the combination, doing that step work and doing that deeper self-reflection and then also at the same time the Phoenix was starting to kind of evolve and grow.
Mhm.
Um I I started seeking more resources. I've always been sort of that way. Like when I get into something, I
A
like try to go
seeker.
deep, and yeah, and I'm always trying to find all the books, and now it's watch every YouTube video about it or whatever. But
Yeah.
but I started actually like referring other people to trauma programs, but
Mm.
I didn't go myself. Right. Like I would keep saying,
Yeah, that's how it
oh,
works.
this might be helpful for you. And then suddenly I realized like maybe I
Oh,
should go, you know, like
yeah.
if maybe I should really go and be willing to kind of, I always think of it as like that kind of trauma work is like you might have heard a noise in the basement while you're sleeping. You'll never really go back to sleep if you don't go see what's down there, if there's
Yeah.
anything there. But you try to, you know, you lay back down, you're like, I don't think it was anything, but maybe it was. And you're always worried. But I standing at the top of the stairs to go down there is terrifying, you know?
Yeah.
And that was sort of how it felt for me. It's like, it was one thing to talk about it and encourage other people to go. But then when I went myself, I just remember getting off the plane and getting in the car to head to this week-long trauma workshop and feeling like I was at the top of the stairs, you know, peering into a black basement, not knowing what I might find down there.
What was the name of the trauma workshop? Do you remember?
It's called Survivors Week. It's part of the Meadows. It's in Wickenburg, Arizona. And it was started
Hmm.
by a woman Pia Melody, who writes extensively about trauma and adverse childhood experience. And um, it was I heard of it because somebody I'm really close to went to inpatient there, and it was
Hmm.
really powerful. So I wanted to have that same opportunity that they did, even though it took me a few years after to get the courage. So
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting how, we avoid, the very I heard this saying recently. It's like the magic you seek is in the work you're avoiding. And that was definitely my experience. And it's so funny because I had gone to meetings for years and years. And I, dabbled in therapy the whole time. I love therapy. Some people don't like, I love therapy because I always feel better afterwards. But it wasn't until I was probably more than 10 years sober, I want to say 10, 15 years sober, something like that, where I really started to grapple with what had happened to me when I was a little girl. I had been sexually abused by a neighbor. And for whatever reason, I just normalized it in my mind and was like, yeah, that happened. It's probably why I drank. I worked the steps. I got and stayed sober. But there was like you were saying, it was like noise in the basement. I was like, oh yeah, that's what that was. It was like I was feeling this. There's something more, and I avoided it for a really long time. And then I finally went to a lady that did. She called it process therapy, but it's a lot like IFS therapy, internal
mm,
family systems. Have you ever
yep.
done that?
I haven't, but I'm familiar with it. My
Oh, it's so
sister is a
good.
practitioner of it. So
Oh, your sister is?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, she's got some good juju. Those are really good tools.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing a round of IFS now. It's blowing my mind. But I sort of had like this moment where I was like, how did I avoid it for so long? It's like I just got so used to it that I didn't recognize that it was there. And I'm just curious, did you have sort of a similar experience, or what kinds of
Yeah.
trauma were you trying to resolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is where I think when we look at like adverse childhood experience and sort of, and Pia Melody talks about this too, which is like overt trauma is something that is obvious to us, right? As humans, we see it, and that is trauma. But covert trauma, these more like subtle traumas that that I talk about as being a little cut, and it won't kill you, but 1,000 little cuts might, or 5,000 little cuts might, so it's sort of like they build over time. And Nadine Burke Harris says it this way, which I think is powerful, that fight or flight is your response developed when so you either are being chased by a bear, you either play dead or run, right? But what happens when you live with the bear and you come home to the bear every night and the bear is in your family of origin? Then you're always in that state, and you're in that heightened state every day for years of your sort of developmental life. And that was sort of more my experience, sort of the emotional traumas on top of some that were more obviously trauma, but it it sort of started to be those 1,000 little cuts, and it started to teach me that I wasn't sort of deserving or worthy of love, even though that's not
Mhm.
true for any person, right? We're all deserving and worthy of love. And I think as I did that deeper work myself, and I was already sort of working in the recovery space with the Phoenix, um, I started to feel more impassioned to be louder about this as an issue, that we're not really looking at the root causes, and that more of the top-down solutions around addiction are focused more on managing symptoms as opposed to getting to the root cause. And that if we're really going to
Mhm.
address the addiction crisis, we have to get more to these root causes. And I think by scaling the Phoenix, this idea of taking nurturing community to scale is where I felt like my calling was.
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of the insights that you got from doing the trauma therapy?
Um, what was really, I think this is I think a normal sort of path for folks maybe, but there's a lot of anger at first about at my dad and my stepdad, more so my father, because if he felt like more the why behind a lot of the pain when I was a kid.
Mhm.
But two things happened. One is, even though I loved my mom very much and we were very close, I had never really sort of held her accountable for the fact that she was sort of failing me too, right? She was the
Yeah.
other adult in the room, and there was really no one else to protect me than her, and she didn't sometimes, but by just circumstance and some other things. And I think I always tried to protect her and say, oh, well, it was a different time and women were viewed sort of differently, and the divorce was hard, and there was sort of this male dominant culture then. But the truth is, she did some sort of abandon me to some of that treatment from my father and my stepfather. And I think just acknowledging that really allowed me to let it go. And I think the other piece of it was understanding that both my mom and my father and my stepdad, that everyone had their own experiences that led them to where they were. And the truth is, they were doing much better than what they had experienced when they were kids, right? They had already sort of uh, sheltered us kids from some of their pain, although much of it they brought with them too. And
Mhm.
so just having a like grace and love for them was helpful in me starting to have grace and love for myself in that
Yeah.
process. It doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable and set up boundaries that protect you. You still need to do those things, but just acknowledging that. I think there's a quote, and I can never remember who says it, that pain is passed from generation to generation until somebody's willing to feel it. And I just
Mm.
love that. And I think it's great to have the opportunity to actually feel it, because then I hand a lot less to my kids.
Yeah. I mean, you're the generation that could break the cycle really with all this. It sounds like you're
So let's
doing all
hope.
the work of.
Yeah.
Well, listen, my husband and I did a fair amount of, recovery work too. It didn't fully escape our kids, but we certainly knew how to handle it when it shows up. So that's, we do the best we can too. I feel like there is in the way like as we learn compassion for our parents, it's like that idea that you can't escape the same measuring stick that you judge others by. It's like I
Hmm.
was judging my parents very harshly, thinking that they should be certain ways. And then I was expecting myself to live up to those same standards, but failing miserably. So as I found compassion for them, I also found compassion myself for myself and sort of let go of some of those moral meanings that I had assigned to myself and them. And it
Yeah,
just kind of, you know, cultivated peace in a way.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I know it's not always, super comfortable to be talking about your childhood, especially if it was challenging, but it sounds like you've done a lot of work in the 26 years since, you put all the drugs and alcohol down. And it sounds like you have tell me about your life now. Is it as peaceful as I want to believe that it is?
Oh, of course not. But the beauty now is I know when I'm being triggered or activated.
Yeah.
I can see that in my partner, my wife Kate, when she's in her stuff, I can recognize that and try to be a grounding force. And then she does that for me too. And we, when you understand that it is peaks and valleys and that we will come out of the valley and we won't
Yeah.
always be there, and we narrow the distance between the peaks and the valleys, with our
Yeah.
recovery, and and it's great to have somebody to share this path with, so I can turn to her on tough days and she can turn to me on mine. So
Yeah. She's in recovery too.
she is, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Did you meet her at the like at a Phoenix event?
I actually met her at jujitsu. So
Oh,
she did a drop in at a jujitsu school I trained at. And then a few months later, I saw her at Phoenix and I was like, hey, I think I know you. She's
oh,
like, no, you
funny.
don't. She was all, she's like, leave me
No,
alone.
you
I'm here to
don't.
work out, But,
Yeah, go away.
but anyway, she's great. And,
You wore
it's
her
just,
down.
yeah, well, no, she and I just like started hanging out,
Oh,
just as
nice.
friends.
Yeah.
And it was, it's been really special ever since.
Yeah. How
So.
long have you been together now?
Oh, a little over, I guess it's over 6 years, just a little over 6 years. So
Nice. And you have a little one. That's so sweet.
yeah, two actually. We have
Oh, you
a
have
two and a
two.
half year old and a nine month old. So
Oh my goodness. You are
yeah,
at the
yeah.
beginning.
So if I
Bless your
fall
heart.
asleep, that's why, because
It's
I'm
not
tired.
me. Okay, don't take it
Yeah,
personally. It's
just still
interesting.
sleepy.
Poor thing.
Um,
Yeah, no, I'll just tell you that little kids are hard on a relationship. I think the sleep deprivation and the work distribution. Oof, that's but once you get it down, it's all good. Mine are in college now, so it's
oh, perfect. Well,
yeah, there's a light
yeah,
at the end of the tunnel.
and I think that, in combination with, trying to build a nonprofit that can scale its programs across the country to help
Yeah.
support people in recovery, it keeps us busy for sure. So
Yeah, I just feel like what I love about the Phoenix is I knew very little about it. I'm still, learning about it, but that it's so all over the place. Like do you base it on like number of locations or how many groups do you have?
yeah, I can give you a little like history and kind of where we are today, if that would be
Sure,
helpful.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
started pretty small. I think the first year in 2007, we had about 70 people come to the Phoenix.
Wow.
And now all these years later, we have about 20,000 people come a month to the Phoenix.
What?
Yeah, and it's primarily led by volunteers. We have staff in some key markets across the country, major cities and some communities disproportionately impacted by addiction. And their primary role is to support those volunteers that are out there leading Phoenix events. So about 80% of all of our events are led by volunteers, and they're people who've been touched by substance use. So it could be a loved one or ally or supporter or somebody with lived experience themselves. And essentially you can find us through the Phoenix app. So if you go to the Phoenix in the app store and find, it's called the Phoenix a Sober Community, if Phoenix isn't near you, you're empowered to be the volunteer who starts it there. And from what you shared earlier, if there's something meaningful you wanted to do, you could go through the training and add a Phoenix event, and our local staff would reach out to you and support you in doing that. And that's how we've grown so much. So we're pretty much in every state, with some level of in-person programming. And we have live stream programming, about 70 events a week through the app. And then we have on-demand content that we distribute in prisons on educational tablets. So you can come to Phoenix when you're on the inside as well.
That's beautiful.
And it's all free. It's we always say the only price of admission is the 48 hours of sobriety.
That's a low bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But
A
I think
low
it's
bar to the fun.
yeah, exactly. And we have a lot of folks that have, 10 years or 20 years, or even some folks with 30 plus.
Yeah.
But it's the beauty of the Phoenix is that, whether you have 2 days or 2 decades, you can find a nurturing community there that believes in you, even if you don't yet believe in yourself.
Mm-hmm. There's something. What do you think it is about the power of community that is so important?
I think it's at a primal level. We look for our pack or our sort of tribe. And then
Mm-hmm.
also I think that having people there that can see past all the sort of negativity that can be in our head, right? Like you may say, I don't know if I could do rock climbing, but I say, oh, you totally got it. Tie into the rope. I believe in you. And then you get to the top, and then your ear to ear smiles, and you come down, and the next person comes in. And you're like, I was brand new too. I didn't think I could do it, but I know you can do it because I did it. And then we just keep paying that forward. And that's what's so special is I think that the solution to one of the sort of biggest issues in our society, the solution is already within all the people experiencing it. If we can
Mm-hmm.
sort of unlock that intrinsic strength that we all have, then I think we could end the addiction crisis as we know it, through people who've been touched by it.
Man, there is so many lonely people. I think social media has really made people feel so isolated. It kind of gives the illusion that you're connected, but you're really not. And it's just such a wonderful way. People and a lot of people don't go to, I hate to say this, but people don't really go to church anymore. Maybe they do. Some people do. I don't know how to qualify that, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
people
Yep.
need community outside of religion. Um, and I'm I thought Phoenix was just solely fitness oriented because people need other things just besides fitness activities too. I mean, it's so funny when you stop drinking and using, you suddenly have so much free time, but
Yeah.
but you still have all the same energy, right? Like you need to do
Yeah.
all this stuff. So we have to channel that energy somehow. And what a beautiful combination between art therapy and physical therapy and all that stuff with community to, that it's so brilliant. I'm just so happy that it has taken off for you guys. It's been a long time that you've been doing this now, right?
Yeah. And I feel like we're still just getting started. Like
Yeah.
you were talking about earlier with sort of mocktails and NA drinks and that kind of thing. We launched out on an initiative called 1 Million Strong, and the idea to serve 1 million people impacted by substance use, through the music space.
Mm.
So we're working
Oh,
sort of
that's big.
with industry leaders, with artists, and with fan communities to sort of normalize NA and substance free spaces at shows and festivals, and to kind of create those spaces and to empower artists to really find their voice, because they can share sort of strength and hope at a whole different scale
Hmm.
than I can. And work with the industry too, so that they're setting aside, that sober tent that we do at Jazz Fest isn't in the very back, but where they park the trucks, and you like go back there for a meeting with like 3 people or something. It's like the
Yeah.
tent's like right there, right off the main stage, and it's got air conditioning and great mocktails, and you can come hang out every day. It's just trying to disrupt a little bit how we're approaching this, and think about a little bit more of like an empowerment mindset, as opposed
Hmm.
to sort of like addiction is like a problem to be managed.
All right.
I
Yeah.
think that we can empower folks that are struggling with it now and folks in recovery, and by coming together, we can be the solution.
I love how you're making it more attractive rather than like a shameful, rescuing
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. And that's why the Phoenix has like sober t-shirts, and,
Yeah.
we're
You got
just,
your t-shirt on, people who
yeah,
aren't watching the YouTube. You
yeah,
got their
just
t-shirt
be
on.
loud and proud about your recovery,
Yeah.
and then you'll make that sort of space of hope for others who might be struggling.
Yeah, I love the idea of sober communities at events like that. I had always heard about like Burning Man has like a sober community. Do you guys ever
Yeah.
go out there?
We haven't yet, but we might have to. Yeah, we're trying to, and that's the beauty of the app. We're trying to work with partner organizations to sort of also advertise for them, right? Like
Right.
there's a great nonprofit called Seek Healing, and it helps folks do some trauma work, and it's community led trauma healing. So they're not clinicians, but they just do what they can within
Mhm.
a community of peers, and we'd love to have more Seek Healing stuff on our calendar, and we'd like to do the same with other groups that want to work with us. So if somebody's already organizing, a sober meetup at some music venue, then we'll partner with them. And I think
Mm.
it's one of those things, we can't sort of solve it on our own, but if we all
Right.
come
Yeah.
together and sort of push in the same direction, I think we can make a real difference.
Absolutely. I really love the idea behind Phoenix too, the rising from the ashes. We do have a tendency to kind of burn shit to the ground.
Yeah, yeah. I know. And I
So
think the ability for all of us to rise,
yeah.
we all have stuff. It's not, I think our expression of our pain might have been more extreme,
Yeah.
with drugs and alcohol, but so many people seek emotional well-being externally. They, what do they look like, or how many likes do they have? How many followers? Do they get paid enough? Do they make enough
Oof.
money? Do they have that car? Or do they live in that neighborhood, or whatever it is? And the truth is, none of that's going to help heal that internal stuff. The
Yeah.
real magic is creating this sort of nurturing community, and a place where you can be loved and accepted for all the parts of you. And what you said earlier, I think, is great. If you can do that for others, you'll find that they'll start doing that for you too.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Where can people find the Phoenix? Is it like a
Yeah,
website? And you said
yeah.
there was an
Just go
app.
to thephoenix.org, and you can learn more, and donate. And
Oh yeah. I was gonna say, how are you guys funded? Do you guys do grants and some private
Yeah,
funding?
grants and individual donors, mostly through foundations, individual philanthropy. So, people who want to make a difference on this issue and want to be disruptors in how they do their philanthropy, then you're our kind of partner. And
Nice.
and then also in the App Store. So just look up the Phoenix, a sober community, and look for the big red Phoenix bird, and yeah, download the app, and it'll geolocate events near you, and if there aren't any, you can be the volunteer that starts it, and that's how we grow into new places.
Yeah, that's awesome. Listen, I could chat with you all day. There's so much to be learned from this, but I'm going to encourage all our listeners to reach out to the Phoenix, and if there's one in your group, go ahead and start one, because I think there really people need a lot, some alternatives to traditional ways. And I just feel like the whole landscape is changing so much. I mean, the hill I will die on is the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor. And it sounds like you had a good experience doing that too. But there is so much available to us now. there
Yeah.
isn't just one way to do it. There's many ways, and lots of people seeking connection. So if you're lonely, if you want to get out and do something, go make slippers or learn how to make
Yeah.
or go skiing, what mountain
What
climbing. I don't think that's my get down tool for that shit.
And the beauty is like we provide all the stuff, right? So you don't need the climbing harness, you don't need anything. You just show up at the event
That's wild. That
and
is so cool.
somebody who's passionate about that thing, who's been touched by substance use in some way, will share what helped them, and then eventually you'll get to that place where you can turn around and share what's helping you,
Yeah.
and we'll just keep paying it forward and reaching back into that burning building and getting more people out.
Yeah.
So that's the hope.
That's the reality. That's what you're doing. Well, thank you so much for all the work that you do. You're impacting so many lives and multiple generations, because as one generation heals, so does the next. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for your work too, and for your vulnerability and sharing today, and for telling so many great stories, that it's helping a lot of folks. So appreciate what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'll look forward to our next conversation and to watching the Phoenix grow.
Yeah, I'll come back when we hit 1 million people served. So that's our goal.
Please
We're
do. Yeah.
over 300,000, hoping 400,000 by the end of the year, and then next year we're gonna go big. So
Go big.
yeah,
Awesome. I love it. Well, great job. Thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
take care.